Okay. Okay. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the Amazons. Now, we're not talking about Amazon. No, we're not going to talk about Bezos. We're not talking about the river, the Amazon River. We are talking about these female warriors from antiquity. That's the topic for today. And I think we're going to start off with just the word, where the word came from. Let's do that. The origin for the word Amazon is not completely certain. It may be derived from the Iranian word that is Hamazon, which means warrior. And we find this out through a Greek derivation and Hesychius of Alexandria's work. Don't worry about that. But the idea is that it is those who make war in ancient Persian. So that's one possible variation. There's another possible word where it came from, and that is namaganos, which of course means manless without husbands. so, and this has been proposed, and this is an Indo-European root. This is a possible root for the word. There is another possible Indo-European root for the word that's also a derivative from of Iranian or ancient Persian, and that is amana, and this means virility killing. Virility killing. You just can't make this up. So, as a source, and this has been proposed by Hittite scholars of all things, investigating various areas. Oh, I got to mention also that some will say it's a derivation from a place located along the Black Sea, specifically on the eastern section of the Black Sea, and a land that's known as Azi. And so the idea is, in some cases, there's a derivation that is Amti, and so hence Amazon. Okay, so those are. So what's the short answer for this? The short answer for this is scholars are guessing. They have no idea. They just know that the word is old, really old, but and in some cases they're thinking Indo-European roots. With that said, the Greeks, being the Greeks, decided to come up with their own idea what this word means, kind of a folk etymology, so to speak. And this is not even better. This is not better. Already we're off to a great start, aren't we? Uh, and that is amazos. Amazos. So meaning without, mazos being a derivative of the word breasts. And so it means those who are without breasts. So, and maybe some will say pertaining to what was understood to be by many sources that there's a practice where they would remove one or two breasts, and in order to make it easier to shoot their arrows and so forth. But once again, this is just a guess. Well, moving on, you learn so much through words. We have the Greeks also use a series of epithets. Uh, these aren't any better. I feel sorry for the Amazons. At least can we get their names right? Well, epithets for them, they will use like Androcotonus, which means killer of men. You have Androlateri, which means destroyers of men or murderesses. We find this of course, in the Iliad. You have the Antonorai, right, which is those who fight like men, and a Cyclus will use another word, a Steigener, which means those who loathe all men. Do you see a theme here at all? So just by taking the words that the Greeks use, it reveals that maybe there's not a great feeling towards the Amazons. There is this conflict with them. And in many cases, it's because the Amazons would be theoretically a matriarchy. And the Greeks, by this point, are very much a patriarchy. So the idea of women warriors who are very powerful, who are able to fight and defeat men, is looked at as not only upsetting, but even somewhat taboo from the perspective of the Greeks. And so that's why you're going to have all these epithets that we find in the primary sources, like killers of men, destroyers of men, murderesses, those who fight like men, and those who loathe all men. You're going to see this. And even in the early derivative of the word virility killing, you're going to see this. So anyway, so there you have it, right? Okay, so where do the Amazons come from? You do have some legendary stories, and I will go there right now. According to the Argonautica, written by Apollonius Rhodius, he refers that the Amazons were the daughters, originally the daughters of Ares, also known as Mars, who is the god of war, and Harmonia. Now, who is Harmonia? This is a nymph of the Achaemonian woods. Now, like I said, obviously Ares is the god of war. Harmonia was the goddess of harmony and concord, and so she was the opposite of Eris, who is the equivalent of strife. We ran into Eris when it came to the one whose strife who wasn't allowed to go to the wedding of Thetis and threw the apple, to the Ferris. Remember this kind of story? Anyway, this Ferris, nobody wants to invite the goddess of strife to your wedding, so causes everything to be divided. Well, on the contrary, in this case, right, Harmonia is the opposite. So Harmonia is invoked to bring about order and people together, and very much welcome at weddings. So she was also a nymph that was believed to be from a place known as Thermascaria or Themascaria. They use the R, Thermascaria, or sometimes it's Themascaria. It works either way. Themascaria, I'll use this one. Themascaria is in a very important site. We're going to be hearing this word over and over again. This is located on the Black Sea on the coast of Asia Minor. So today, it is the northern coast of Turkey that's literally on the Black Sea in the very central area. And that's where it is. And this particular Harmonia, she's connected with the city, and most likely she's a nymph. So most likely she's connected to a local spring. And so it is said that the first generation of the Amazons were born via the union of Ares and Harmonia. Now, Strabo, who is this famous geographer living from the first century BCE, the first century CE, also mentions that the original home of the Amazons were at Themascaria. Here we are again. And the plains about Thermodon and the mountains that lie above them. But according to him, they were later on driven out of these places. And during his time, they are said to live in the mountains above the Caucasus. So that they're said to be driven further north. Again, you're going to see this a lot, where the Amazons, wherever civilization is, the Amazons tend to not be. They tend to be located on the fringes of civilization. So as Greek civilization expands outward into Asia Minor, for example, what will happen is the land of the Amazons seems to move with them, move along with them, and going further and further out, pushed further away. So we see this a lot. So anyway, the Thermoscaria is still very important. Now, what will happen is there's another interesting homeland. Some Greeks connect the Amazons, their homeland, with a lake known as Maeotis. Lake Maeotis is today the Sea of Azov. Now, you may recognize that name, the Sea of Azov. This is basically, this is on the northern section of the Black Sea, and is bounded on the north by mainland Ukraine, in the east by Russia, and on the west by the Crimean Peninsula. So this is the area today that's under dispute because Ukraine claims it, right? And Russia had annexed it. And so, yeah, so this is in the news. Well, that's one of the other claim places for the Amazon homeland. But this was a little bit later on. So we're kind of pushing the Amazons now from the northern Black Sea, from the southern Black Sea along the coast of Asia Minor. Now we have pushed the Amazons across the Black Sea to the northern coast near the Crimea. Is that making sense? So again, it's pushing them further and further away as time goes on. And accordingly, the Maeotic Lake, which is Sea of Azov, was a place that's connected to, in some cases, some legends have Epiphageneia as living here as a priestess of the cruel goddess. So they have many different kinds of sources here talking about what goes on. Now, what I find is interesting here is that yet there is another story. As time goes on, you have, here we go, the third version of the story, and we're moving later on a little bit in time, is that no. they're not from the southern part of the Black Sea, which is the northern Turkey today, and they're not from the northern shore of the Black Sea, which is of course along the Crimea. No. They are further west, and they are connected to the realms of Scythia. Although you do have those who say that they are further east along the Caucasus Mountains. Again, I want to stress the fact that we have evidence that they're being pushed further and further north as time goes by. Well, don't worry, we'll talk more about them in detail. But I want to mention something else. And that is, with all these theories going on, it's very interesting that one of the earliest sources concerning the Amazons, which is of Homer, locates the Amazons in southern Anatolia, which is southern Turkey. In fact, according to the Iliad, he mentioned the Amazons were found near Lycia. Then, furthermore, the Amazons were said to have founded the cities and temples of Smyrna, Sinope, Gryne, Ephesus, Patania, Magnesia, Crete, Latoria, Amistris, and they also invented the cavalry. So I wish we had a map here, but what I find is interesting is we go back to the time, even though the Iliad was composed, oral tradition, composed around the 700s BCE, even though it goes back to the 1200s during the Mycenaean epoch. It's interesting that the Amazons are even closer to the Greek civilization. The earliest memories show them even closer. So we have this, and we can trace this, which I think for me it's fascinating. You can trace this movement that you have supposedly the Amazons are in southern part of Turkey, and then they move into the western part of Turkey, which is the Anatolia, which is also known as Asia Minor, and then they move into the northern part of Turkey, along the Black Sea, and then they cross over into the northern part of the Black Sea, which is of course the area of the Lake of Azov, right, in the Crimea area, and then they're pushed off in two different directions. One direction they moved off to the Caucasus Mountains, and the other to the Scythian. So you have this idea of, depending on the time, the Amazons are moved further and further away. And yet there's very strong traditions that during the Mycenaean period of time, these supposed legendary peoples were very close along the Ionian coast in southern Turkey. Oh, now you're thinking, why are you telling us this? Is there a master plan? Oh yeah, there is. You're gonna learn, take notes, because we're gonna get ready for a ride, because there are roots that go further back, and we'll go into that. These echoes, right? Okay, so now moving right along. Now, of course, obviously, several cities of Asia Minor boasted that they were founded by the Amazons, very proud of it. Consistent with these claims is the fact that in this area, the figure or the head of an Amazon was used constantly on their coinage. So you see that, of course, for example, Smyrna would have Amazons on their coins, and Ephesus would as well. So we know for a fact that, in fact, we have Horace mentions that the Amazons are said to have lived in near the city of Mysia, which is in Caria, which is the southern part of Anatolia or Turkey, as well as Lydia. Now, this evidence as a whole seems to point not to the plain at the mouth of the Thermodon as the traditional dwelling place of this group, but further down to the west and to the south, and is connected to the legend of Bellerophon, mentioned, of course, by Homer and as well as others. So we go again further down. Now, there are other traditions. So we mentioned a few, but there's one more, and this is going to throw you completely off. There seems to be threads of an even earlier legend that places the Amazons, I hope you're holding your breath, it places the Amazons in Libya. Now you're going, what? Wait, what? Libya? Wait, Libya? That's North Africa. Is that right next to Egypt? Uh-huh. And there are stories and legends that mention that they migrate from Libya, North Africa, and Egypt throughout the Middle East into the southern part of what is now Turkey, into Western Turkey, and then into the northern shore. So it looks like that these stories of the Amazons are migrating. But what throws me off, and it does, and throws off other scholars, is the fact that, well, that's the hinterland, that's the edge of civilization on the other side. And so many are scratching their heads thinking, are the Amazons completely a figment of one's imagination? Or is there something to it? Is there something to that there is this migrating group that's being traced that has female leadership and female warriors involved? not migrating in a gypsy-like sense, or maybe, but migrating nevertheless. This will blow your mind. We're going to go somewhere else in a little bit, but I got to build it up. So we have this idea now. Now, who exactly were the Amazons? And what were they like? What were their beliefs like? And were the most significant figures? Now, the earliest reference to the Amazons uh, does arrive by way of the Iliad, but within the Iliad itself, there's an even earlier story that is wedged into the Iliad. So, in other words, there's an earlier story, and then the Iliad brings it in. Remember, the Iliad was composed through oral tradition. What's fascinating is that um, what happened. The bards would tell their stories. They would tell their rhapsodies, right? And they'd sing their rhapsodies. Like, remember Bohemian Rhapsody? Bohemian Rhapsody, what would happen is that you notice that song by Queen have all these quick changes. What happened? It seems like that song has different songs all put together. Well, that's what a bard would do. A bard would be singing along, and entertaining people, and then you hear another song, and they go, "Hey, that would be great to memorize and put into my song." And it would be added in. That's what happened. So the Iliad, as well as the Odyssey, would include many of these stories, these smaller, earlier stories that were then added to as a flourish to add. So the Iliad wasn't all composed all at once. Uh, the Iliad, who's ascribed to Homer, many different authors were involved with it. But there's also earlier stories, and there's an earlier stories that scholars have detected within the Iliad that goes, and so yeah, so we have that, and so we take a look, and it goes further back, and it contains references, two direct references to the Amazons that go earlier, namely, of course, the story of Bellerophon, Bellerophon, and that's the Iliad, sections 6, 168 to 195. And another passage that's from section 3, 182 to 190. The first one is very short. It says that King Iobates sent Bellerophon against the Amazons, hoping that they would kill him. But Bellerophon killed them all. It's like, okay, that's it. The context, of course, is viewed as an echo from a pre-Homeric saga, and so it does, connect to an earlier Amazon story in Greek literature that's earlier than the Homeric poems. The description of the women are not that much here, but but the fact that the battle with them is considered a severe test of Bellerophon's heroic abilities. In fact, it was ranked with him fighting against the monstrous Chimera, right? And the fierce Solomai and the picket men of Lycia. We understand that because of this, these Amazons already had a fierce reputation besides these scary monsters. You have these Amazons, these women that can defeat this hero. So this is one of the sources. So again, it was embedded. The second one is more definite. King Priam of Troy, he was talking about how happy Agamemnon is, and which had been pointed out to him. He says to Helen, um, his daughter, he says, "Oh, happy Atrid, Fate's daughter, child, blessed with prosperity, excuse me. Verily to thee are many subject youths of the Achaeans. Once did I go to vine-rich Phrygia, where I beheld vast numbers of Phrygian men with swift moving steeds, the people of Otreus and godlike Mygdon, who were then encamped by the banks of the Sangrius. For I was numbered an ally with these on the day when the Amazons came, pitted against men, right? Yet even these were not as many as are the quick glancing Achaeans. So here we have it. So apparently, uh, King Priam was at a gathering to fight against the Amazons, which is located along Phrygia. You can see here, this is, of course, Western Asia Minor, and they're understood as, again, fearsome, right? Uh, you see here that they kind of here as a horde of warrior women that fight against men, but to fight against them is dangerous. You want to avoid it, right? And once again, they are connected to Lycia. I've been to Lycia, which I find is interesting because the Lycian women, even into the Roman period, had more rights than all throughout the, in many other places around the ancient world. But they were able to, of course, have property, and they had their own special, uh, um, 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 their own public cult where only they were allowed to participate in, and so forth. And so it's interesting because the Amazons come from an area that historically patriarchy was more weak, even into the Roman era, which is, of course, obviously a good thing, right? Okay, so now, obviously, the Amazons are understood to be fables, right? Maybe part of like romantic legend, right? But at the same time, I don't know. There seems to be some realism here. There's always a kernel of truth behind many of these legends, right? And there's also something else that kind of throws people off. And that is, there's all these stories about the Amazons and how they invade Attica. But there's a moment in time where the Amazons get so enraged, we'll talk about connecting the dots later, that they attack mainland Greece. So they cross over from Turkey, which was then Asia Minor, and they attack mainland Greece. And so the Amazon, and so throughout Attic Greece, there are all these locations of tombs dedicated to the Amazons that were killed in battle during this invasion. That geographers like Pausanias says, okay, if you visit the city, make sure you go visit so and so's tomb. This is the Amazon so and so died here, and so forth and so on. I mean, you got the tomb of Antiope at Athens, for example. You got the tomb of Hippolyta at Megara. You got tombs of Amazons at Charonia and Thessaly, right? You got a tomb of Marina near Troy. I mean, come on. These are tourist attractions. People want it. And so once again, you're thinking, well, maybe did they invade? Wait, are we dealing with legend? Or are we dealing with historical reality? And it just, again, it gets into this very fuzzy area, right? But, Pausanias, again, specifically, he had told about the story that Hippolyta was buried at Megara. And in fact, he says as follows. So I'm going to tell you a story that the Megarans say about the Amazons that were invaded into mainland Greece. So let's hear it directly. He says, I will write her story as the Megarans tell it. I love Pausanias. He was a geographer living during the 2nd century CE, and he went about throughout Greece recording their local legends and stories. It was basically a travel guide. It's a lot of fun to read. And if you ever go to Greece, I would highly recommend that you take Pausanias's description of Greece with you, and especially the annotated version, so that when you're in Greece, you can see what the modern town is. And so it's really cool because you can go visit these cities, and then you can look and read because he writes everything. You read what Pausanias says about the ancient legends and the religions and how they did things, worship and festivities in each of the towns. It, if you walk away with anything from this talk, walk away with that idea, Pausanias. And if you go to Greece, you will thank me thousands of times because it really makes it all come to life. Anyway, so he's very much an anthropologist at heart. So he goes into each culture and records just basically what they do without having an agenda. So he says, I will write her story as the Megarans tell it. Good for you. He says, when the Amazons made their expedition for Antiope's sake and were overthrown by Theseus, it was the fate of the many to die in battle. But Hippolyta, who was a sister to Antiope and was at that time in command of the women, fled with a few to Megara. Now, this is mainland Greece. This is the battle that's going on at this time in Attica. But inasmuch as she had fared so ill with her armament and was cast down by circumstances of the present, and was still more discouraged about a safe return to Themyscira, you know Themyscira now, which is located along the northern coast of Asia Minor, the southern, the southern coast of the Black Sea. She died of grief, and the shape of her tomb is like to an Amazonian shield. So when you, during the 2nd century, you could visit her tomb at Megara, and it was shaped like a Amazonian shield. Was it really her tomb or not? We don't know. But the Greeks believed it was her tomb. And once again, why is this important? Well, this puts the Amazons, no longer way out there. They're invading the realm of so-called civilization. And then you have these places, these locations where this moment is venerated, right? So, once again, you have this as a source. Now, the story of the Amazons, as the Greeks thought of them, will not be complete without a few additional bits and pieces. Accordingly, it was supposedly the custom of the Amazons to burn out their right breast. Yeah, burn out the right breast in order that they might draw a better bow. So the idea is they burn out. Now, what do you mean burn out? I found one source that talked about the burning out even in infancy, which doesn't make any sense because there's nothing to grow, but whatever. So the idea is the removal of the breast so they could better, you know, do their archery. That's the right breast. But then again, a lot of people will say that story was used as an explanation for the epithet that we talked about earlier of Amazon, which means without breast, believing that Amazon means those who are without the breast. And so they kind of forced this definition upon them based on the fact that, well, the word sounds like it, so it must mean the same. Other scholars, however, say, no, there's good evidence to say that they did reduce that breast. And then there's the explanations that we see from various images. So the various images where you see that oftentimes, and quite often, and most often, you see on various statues and images of the Amazons, they always seem to have one breast that's covered. And most often it is the right breast. But hey, we got to keep abreast of these situations. So I'll tell you more later. So there we go. Now Herodotus also of course he's the famous historian. He mentions the fact that those known as the Sarmatians are descendants of the of the Amazons, and he mentioned that they do this practice. Now, what I find is interesting is that we know for a fact the Sarmatians do exist. Way back when I did a paper on the Sarmatians, you know, and they are a group that's connected to the Scythians, and they are located north of the Black Sea region. And there are some stories that some of their women uh, remove one breast, and they were warriors alongside with their men. So, but hey, I gotta quote all the sources. Illustratus, however, who's living in the third century, he says, no, 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 the Amazons were never mutilated. He said they didn't remove their breast at all. That's somebody else. Oh, so there he is. There we have it. So we don't have a statue of just a one-breasted Amazon, but we do have a lot of statues that have it covered. So it's up for argument. Don't you love how people just kind of can agree to disagree? Now, I am going to talk about three Amazons, and then I'm going to go into Amazon religion. What? Yeah. Hey, we'll talk more about the Amazons, but I want to talk about three figures, three Amazons, because we learn a lot about the Amazons through these three individuals. And then we'll move into what they believe. Okay. And this, and I want to leave that towards the end because that part becomes more extensive. I want to make sure I get this first stuff out of the way, but also it's a great way to start things out. And these are the three individuals I'm going to focus in on when it comes to the Amazons. They are Myrina, Myrina, Myrina. The second is Penthesilea, Penthesilea. Just think of a pen, Thesilia, Penthesilea. And the final one is, of course, Hippolyta, Hippolya, connected, of course, horses, right? Okay, so we're going to focus in on those three, right? So now there is, let's talk about Myrina. We're going to talk Myrina first. And this is going to be exciting. And you don't know what's up ahead, but I know. And you're going to be listening pretty well to this. So here we go. Myrina. So there is an indirect, rather direct reference to Myrina in the Iliad. It involves a place of assembly for the Trojans and their allies. And it mentions Myrina. It says as follows. There is before the city, that being city of Troy, a certain lofty barrow in the plain far away, standing detached on this side and on that, which men forsooth call Baetia, but the immortals name it the grave of swift bounding Myrina. Here then were the Trojans numbered and their allies. So here you have in Troy, according to the Iliad, a site dedicated to Myrina, and apparently this is a tomb. So Myrina is buried here at Troy. So taking a look here, of course, this seems to be obviously the Amazon by name. And there is, in a sense, the way it is written in Greek, there is a sense of, how do I put this? A sense of wonder and awe to it. That this is a very a magical, amazing place, and you'll see why, because the Trojans, even though Priam supposedly fought the Amazons at one point, the Amazons will become the allies of the Trojans against the Greeks in the Iliad. So they are on the side of the Trojans. Got it? So of course, obviously, it makes sense with Asia Minor. Okay, so this tomb of Myrina, right? So must be a grave. Also, the Greek. I wish we could go through. Anyway, I have the Greek here. I'm looking at it. there is a feeling of a supernatural element like this, that by meeting here, you will be imbued with good luck, that something good will happen. It's, to use their words, it's an auspicious meeting place, you know. So there we have it, you know, and the Amazons were said to have, however, dealings with another group. Queen Myrina, I gotta take some water on this one. You know, I'm doing this intentionally to you guys. Queen Myrina was said to have dealings with those who are from Atlantis. Now I got your attention. They're the Greeks talking about this. Now, you know, we always hear about Atlantis and you always hear the same sources. Here we go, it's Plato again, you know, quoting from Solon, who got his story from Alexandria, right? You know, from the Egyptians, you know, Alexandria before Alexandria. Alexandria didn't even exist then, but you know, Solon who got it from the Egyptians, you know, from the priests or whatever, you know. So you know, this is, you have these stories that it's the same one over and over again. You know, it talks about. So you're going to hear a new Atlantis story. How's that? So by way of the Amazons, we learn more about the legendary story of Atlantis. So here we go. According to, I'll give you the source. According to Diodorus, So I gave you the source. Now you know. Most people don't know this story, so you're hearing it maybe for the first time here. The Amazons were under the rule of Queen Myrina, and she invaded the land of the Atlanteans. What? That the that the Amazons were so ferocious that they invaded Atlantis and they defeated the Atlantean city of Cerne. And they were fierce against those who were defeated. They they wiped out all the men, you know, uh, and of course took the women and the children into slavery, and they burned the city to the ground. And they really scared those of Atlantis. So, in fact, those of Atlantis were filled, it was said, with terror. And rather than, you know, I mean, they destroyed the first town they arrived completely. Rather than continue this, those of Atlantis decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to capitulate. The Amazons were supposedly stronger than those of Atlantis. Wow, right? You know, so they announced that they would do whatever the Amazons told them to do, and they treated Myrina with honor, and they decided that they're going to establish a friendship with them. And so they refounded a city on the site of Cerne, and so in honor of the Amazons, and of course connection to the fact that she that she had decided to make peace in the first place. They presented her with magnificent presents, and by public decree, they gave her notable honors, and of course she returned the courtesy, and she promised from there on out, because they had capitulated, she would show kindness to their nation. Now it mentions that Diodorus mentions that the Amazons of Queen Myrina, they use the skins of gigantic snakes from Libya to protect themselves at battle. So these Amazons are wearing snake skins. and they're from Libya. You're, wait a minute, wait, didn't you mention the stories that the Amazons were from Libya? Yeah. So you're going, wait a minute. So Libya is starting to move towards the Western Mediterranean, right? And Atlantis is connected further west. Oh, by George, I think you've got it. Let's make the connection even stronger. You guys having fun so far? So we got Atlantis in there, and you didn't think it's going to happen again. Here. Later, Queen Myrene, she led the Amazons against those known as the Gorgons. Again, it was during the reign of Myrina, according to Hesiod, which is a really early source, right? According to Reina Marina, that the Amazons encountered another race of female warriors known as the Gorgons. Now, Hesiod goes back to around 600 BCE. It's really early. And here you have a reference to another group of female warriors that just so happen to be called the Gorgons. You may recognize that name too. And so the Amazons who defeated the Atlanteans, right? They succumbed. Hey, they are fierce, aren't they? Now they're fighting against the Gorgons, against other female warriors, right? Because the men, were slain, but the women now. Here we go. So we see this in Hesiod's Theogony, right? Now we move on and we read. It goes on a little bit further. Here we go. Again, we're back to Hesiod. It says, and to Porcus, or Cato, bore the Graeae with fair faces and gray from birth, the Graeae or Graeae. With these, the gods who are immortal and men who walk on the earth, called the Graeae, or also known as the Grey Sisters. And now Hesiod's going to talk about the Grey Sisters. One is Pempredo, robed in beauty and Enyo, robed in saffron, and the Gorgonas, or the Gorgons. So from the combination of Phorcus and Cato, they bear these gray women, the Grey Sisters. They also bear the Gorgons. And it continues, who, beyond the famous stream of Oceanus, do you notice? So they're at the edge of the world, beyond the stream of Oceanus. So they're at the edge of the world, much like Atlantis, at the edge of the world, right? Live the utmost place towards the night by the singing Hesperides. And then Hesiod names them. They are Snithno, they are Uraeo, and Medusa. Ta-da! There's Medusa. Hey, wait, the Amazons fought against Medusa? Wait, I didn't hear this before. I know, because we're going at such a deep level. This is Hesiod, right? Who, by the way, continues, whose fate is a sad one, for she was mortal, but the other two immortal and ageless, both alike. Poseidon, he of the dark hair, lay with one of these in a soft meadow and amongst spring flowers. But when Perseus had cut off the head of Medusa, there sprang from her blood the great Castor and the horse Pegasus, so named from the springs of Oceanus, where she was born. So we kind of lost part of the story there. Hesiod didn't tell the whole thing here, but you do have this. You now have these Gorgons are going to fight against the Amazons, and there's more than just three. You'll find out in a few seconds. It turns out that there's a whole lot of them in this battle. So what happens is that the Gorgons there will be this great battle between the Gorgons and those who are the Amazons. In fact, Marina's large army, actually I'll tell this. So the Gorgons, what they do is they attack Atlantis. Now, as we already know, Atlantis and the Amazons have created this peace treaty amongst themselves. They're all friendly. But now here come the Gorgons, and the Gorgons are attacking Atlantis. And, Atlantis can't handle it. So guess who's going to save the day? Yes, the Amazons. The Amazons come to the rescue and they fight against, accordingly, 3,000 Gorgon warriors. 3,000. That's a lot there, right? That's all. So 3,000 Gorgon warriors. The captive Gorgons, however, they start a rebellion, but they were put down by the Amazons, who killed every remaining prisoner. This is typical, right? And of course, at that point, after the battle against the Gorgons to save the day, to help their Atlantean allies, Myrina accorded a funeral to her fallen comrades on 3 pyres and raised up 3 great heaps of earth as tombs, which are called Amazon mounds. So what happens is that you have these gigantic tombs, these artificial mounds. They call them, and the idea of these Amazon mounds spreads throughout antiquity. So when they see like this artificial mound, oftentimes they would say, "Hey, Amazons are buried there." Wink, wink, right? Well, you're thinking, is there any more here? Uh-huh. So what is Myrina? Well, Myrina is kind of important, isn't it? Who wants to do research on this? Me, right? So Myrina travels then from Atlantis, which is near Libya, which I find is interesting, right? And migrates from the Western Mediterranean, according to the stories, to the Eastern Mediterranean. So she moves, right? Which I think is interesting. Now, I want to bring up one little bit here, and that is, so she's, apparently they're in Libya, right? It's interesting because let's go to Plato quickly when he talks about those of Atlantis. Plato's account goes as follows. He says, now in the island of Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire which had rule over the whole island and several others, as well as over parts of the continent, that being, of course, Europe, Western Europe. And besides these, they subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Hercules as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia or Italy. So according to this, the borders of Atlantis, if they were outside of the Strait of Gibraltar, supposedly extended in along the southern coast of Spain and all, and ended where the Etruscans are. Ended there, Tyrrhenia. And on the southern coast, it continued along where Morocco is, where Algeria is, where Tunisia is, and then it stopped or got to Libya and at times extended to Egypt. It's interesting because, according to the Amazon stories, the Amazons are in Libya, and so you have the two side by side. They're bordering each other, supposedly. And then, of course, you have a migration from there of the Amazons from Libya, and I'll tell you where that goes in a few moments. What I also find is interesting is that Libya was the center of another belief system. Another interesting bit, I want to mention this, and that is Libya was the center of where Athena was worshipped as the blue-eyed Athena of Poseidon, and was in many ways different in characteristics from the gray-eyed Athena that was connected to the Greeks and to Zeus. So you have this early story where it was Poseidon that was the father of Athena, and that seems to be earlier on, and connected not only with Libya, but also Crete, and then the Cyclades as well. And then, of course, you have the story of Zeus being connected to the father of Athena everywhere else except for Arcadia and parts of Asia Minor. So you do have these earlier stories that I find interesting. Anyway, so after, I wish I could mind that, but I did. If you're interested, listen to my talk on Athena, and I go into detail on that. So Libya is a very important area when it comes to Greek stories and legends. So after leaving Atlantis, Myrina was said to have conquered most of Libya. Yep. And then she led her army east towards Egypt. And then Queen Marina also had dealings with the ancient Egyptians, and then went from there, accordingly, to, well, Asia Minor. But you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just read some of the primary sources here. So basically, she struck a peace treaty, supposedly, with the ruler of Egypt, and his name is Horus. So we're going back to earlier legends, right? Of course, obviously, Horus is so important when it comes to ancient, pre-dynastic into the Old Kingdom, right? Horus, ruler of Egypt, and conquered many groups. It is mentioned specifically that the Amazons then made an agreement with the Egyptians, and they continued to fight against the Syrians and those in Arabia and Cilicians, but granted freedom to those of the latter who gave in to her of their own will. So, so we can trace them from Libya to Egypt to Arabia into Syria and then to Cilicia going in. So we can actually trace them. So you have the origins of their migrations taking place here. And then, of course, it mentions that they crossed into Major Phrygia, to the Taurus Mountains, and to the Aegean Islands. They mentioned Lesbos specifically, and to Myrene and Mytilene and Semele and Pekine and Parina. And Myrina's army was eventually defeated by Mopsus of the Thracian and Syphilis the Scythian, and this is where they fell in battle. So there you have it. So through looking at Myrina, we have the other half of the story. So you have this constant story where now we put it all together, see how the stories go, that theoretically, according to belief and mythology, the Amazons were bordering Atlantis, and then they moved across Egypt, and then they moved Arabia, Syria, Cilicia, and then into southern Turkey, southern Anatolia, southern Asia Minor. It's all the same name. And then, of course, they get to Lycia, and that connects what we talked about earlier. And then they move where? To western Turkey, western Asia Minor, western Anatolia. And then what they do is that they move from there to northern Turkey, Asia Minor, Anatolia, and then along the Black Sea. And then they're pushed across the Black Sea to the southern coast of the Crimea, and then they're just scattered in a sense two different directions. The Caucasus Mountains one way, the Scythia and the Sarmatians the other way. And wow, look at that! We got a complete picture. It's mythology, maybe, but it looks like there's a lot of consistency here, and we're putting the puzzle pieces together. Plus, you got the story of the Gorgons. Oh, by the way, one thing about the Gorgons before I forget. They're said to have like snake-like hair, and have turning stone-like abilities, which I think should throw you off because wait a minute, that story goes on to Medusa after her transformation, and not before. But here we have, and then you have this other strange element. Where did you guys catch it? The Amazons are wearing snake skins. So we're finding some of the early origins of snake-like aspects of not just the Amazons, but going into the Gorgons. I love digging in this deep into history. Okay, you ready for the next one? And by the way, I'm loving this. I'm taking my time, and because this is why we're here, and I was so happy just to do this part. Now, another notable queen of the Amazons was known as Penthesilea. 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 Fun name to say, Penthesilea. I have to say it quite a few times. So, who was now part of the Trojan War. So now we're in the Trojan War era, and Penthesilea was part of that. In some versions of the story, she's the sister of Hippolyta. In other versions, she is not. So it just depends. But she is the daughter of Ares and Otrera. Um, and what's interesting is here is it looks like Ares, while he started off the Amazons, apparently he gets involved every now and then with the Amazons. So he just kind of goes back. So throughout the generations, apparently Ares just kind of hangs around and bestows more Amazons. Okay, so we will just move on that one. So in the Trojan War, she assisted the Trojans, and she was known to offer gallant resistance to the Greeks. Now, we have many versions of the story, but accordingly, when Achilles slew Penthesilea, he is said to have killed Thersites because he treated her body with contempt and reproached Achilles for his love towards her. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, you got to stop. You got to tell me what in the world is going on. I will. So I have here this story of Achilles loving Penthesilea, loving her, and killing one of his comrades after her death, is everywhere. What I mean by everywhere, you're going to see it's an Arcentius of Miletus talks about it. I have the version right here. The Martinius of Miletus talks about it. I have the version here. You have Pseudo Apollodorus, his version. I have it right here. You have Lycophron's version. You have it here. These are all names you never hear because nobody ever reads ancient sources anymore. I have Diodorus Sicullus's version here. I have Pausanias's version here. In fact, I have a few of his versions here. But the version I'm going to go through, which seems to encapsulate so many of them, and it does a real good job of it, is by Quintus Smyranius. Quintus Smyranius, which means basically Quintus from Smyrna, and Smyrna was traditionally founded by the Amazons. So, he's biased. So Amazon's there. And he talks about the fall of Troy. So we're going to take a look. He wrote during the 4th century CE. So I'm looking at his book 1. And I'm not going to read the whole account. I'm going to read sections of it, just enough so you get the feeling, the flavor of the story. So here it is. So it says, then from Thermodon, that's the river that, which is northern, along the Black Sea there. From Thermodon, from broad sweeping streams, came clothed upon with beauty of goddess Penthesilea. Came athirst indeed for groan-sounding battle, but yet were fleeting, abhorrent reproach and evil fame, lest they of her own folk should rail on her because of her own sister's death, for whomever her sorrows waxed. Hippolytus, whom she had struck dead with her mighty spear, not of her will, 'twas at a stag hurled. So what is he saying in all this poetry? He's saying that she killed her sister. She was hurling a spear at a deer and missed and killed her sister. Ooh, that's not good, right? So it continues. So came she to far famed land of Troy. Yea, and her warrior spirit pricked her on of murder's dread pollution, thus to cleanse her soul, and with such sacrifice to appease the awful ones, the Erinyes, who in wrath for her slain sister straightway haunted her unseen. Forever round the sinner steps they hover. None may escape those goddesses. So what's going on here? I'm acting as translator. What's going on here is that, well, if you kill your sister, you just did ritual pollution. That's not good because then the Erides, who are the underworld chthonic, goddesses of vengeance, uh, they're also known as the Furies, start to haunt her, start to torture her. And this Amazon just does not know what to do. So the best way to appease them from haunting her, from following her, is to go into war, to fight on behalf of the Trojans. There we go. So she takes other Amazons with her, and with her followed 12 beside, each one a princess. So she's a queen, right? She's a queen, and she has three princesses, 12 princesses following her. It says, yet their handmaids unto her, Penthesilea, far outshone them all. Now, I love this poetry. I'm going to read this because it describes how beautiful she is, and that's important to the story. So, got to keep track. So, as when in the broad sky, amidst the stars, the moon rides over all preeminent, when through the thunder clouds the cleaving heavens open, when sleep the fury breathing winds, so peerless was she amongst the changing hosts. So basically, she's really beautiful, right? And of course, it mentions, the others, what they look like. It mentions that her smile, it says, her smile was ravishing. Beneath her brows, her love enkindling eyes shone like stars. And with the crimson rose of shamefastness, bright were her cheeks, and mantled over them unearthly grace with bridal prowess clad. Such great language. So she's pretty. Sorry. Yeah, she's beautiful, right? So I love these lines, love enkindling eyes shone like the stars. Wow. Okay. Then joyed Troy's folk despite past agonies when they beheld there in their land Penthesilea, dread of fire for battle. So they're happy she's there. And gifts they gave her, costly ones. And then she made, oh, you never do this, never do this. She promised, as no man hoped for, even to lay Achilles low, to smite the wide host of the Argive men and cast the browns red flaming on the ships. Oh, fool! Right? You don't do that. In fact, Andromache said, wow, that's such an arrogant heart. But you know who heard this boast? Oh, yeah, Athena. Athena's all, okay, so you boast a little too much hubris. So what happens is that Athena gives her a dream, and it's a deceitful dream. And the dream shows basically, as she dreams, her father, who is Ares, appears and basically says that, hey, you're going to beat everybody up. You're going to defeat everybody. So when she wakes up, thinks it's a good omen, thought her father, Ares, was actually talking to her. It wasn't. It was Athena. And she was laughing for glee. She was happy. And she was in pride of her triumph. She had already won. In her mind, oh, wow. When you listen to these stories, you know that everybody listening to this thinking, oh no, this is going to be bad. Whenever a hero, an ancient hero starts the boast, you know it's going to be bad. Okay, so what happens is that, well, at first the battle goes well. Penthesilea smote and slew Molion, and so he starts beating them. She starts winning, but unfortunately, uh, she starts noticing that those of her 12 start to fall one by one. And so what happens, one of her fair maid Cloney, basically was hit twixt hip and hip and rushed the dark blood forth after the spear, and her bowels gushed out. Oh yeah, it gets bad. They're being slain left and right. Gore spirited a crimson fountain, and one by one, they all start to die. Meanwhile, of course, it goes on for pages, which I will not read. One by one, uh, they're gone, and she seems to be the one that is left standing. Well, when battle eager Pensathelia saw these twain as though the scourging storm of war, like raving beasts they rushed. To meet them there she sped, and while these in armor clad and putting trust in their long spears, awaiting her lightning leap, so did those warriors twang with spears unswung, waited Pensacola. Now what happens now is she makes a leap, right? And first leap the long shafted lance sped from the hand of goodly Pensacola. Straight it flew to the shield of Achilles, but glancing thence this way, basically what happened is that she threw the spear and it sprang as from a rock face. It just kind of bounced off. Uh-oh, she's in trouble. And so now the battle between her and Achilles takes place. And so what happens, we know what's happening right here, is that he swung up his mighty hand and sped the long spear, warrior slain, wrought by Chiron above the right breast, pierced the battle-eager maid. The red blood leapt forth as a fountain wells, and all at once fainted the strength of Pentasilea's limbs, dropping the great battle axe with her nerveless hand. A mist of darkness overveiled her eyes, and anguish thrilled her soul. Yet even so, still drew she difficult breath, still dimly saw the hero, even now in act to drag her from the swift steed's back. And then what he does is that he slays her steed, and she falls. She's pierced, and she goes into what's said the dust of the earth. Face down she lay on the long spear, outgasping her last breath, stretched upon that fleet horse as on a couch. You're thinking, that's the end of the story, she's dead. Well, now when the Trojans saw the warrior queen struck down in battle, they looked at her, and when he saw her beauty, she was dead. Achilles looked down. Then there as fallen in dust and blood she lay, rose like the breaking of the dawn to view neath daintily penciled brows a lovely face, lovely in death. Now, it means, what does that mean? Daintily penciled brows. That means that, her eyebrows were penciled in, right? She penciled in. Yep. The Argives throng around, and all they saw and marveled, for she seemed like an immortal. In her armor there upon the earth she lay, and seemed the child of Zeus, the tireless huntress Artemis sleeping, with time her feet forthwith are with follows lions, and flying shafts over the hills far stretching. In fact, it says she was made a wonder of beauty, Aphrodite crowned, and Achilles falls in love with her after her death. Yea, Achilles' very heart was wrung with love's remorse to have slain a thing so sweet, who might have borne her home, his queenly bride, to chariot glorious Pythia, for she was flawless, a very daughter of the gods, divinely tall and most divinely fair. Okay, so and so then, of course, Ares discovers, he runs down. Well, what happens is then Thersites, who is one of Achilles' companions, starts to mock Achilles, who's now in love with the now dead Amazon queen. And he was so angry, so railed he long and loud, the mighty heart of Peleus' son leapt into flame of wrath. A sudden buffet of his resistance hand smote neath the railer's ear, and all his teeth were dashed to the earth. He fell upon his face, forth of his lips the blood in torrent gushed. swift from his body fled the dastard soul of the vile who was complaining. So there you have it. And then, of course, he threw her in the river, and then he fished her out and gave her a mighty burial. And he was all beside himself. Wow, what a story! But you learn a lot about the Amazons and their beauty and their power, and they have this ability to beguile anyone just by looking at them. So they have so much power, but at the same time, even power over the hearts. They are, in many ways, they are like goddesses. They are heroic. And you know, with Aries going down every now amongst them, you do have a lot of divine blood flowing through them. And of course, her father was Aries, who was very upset and came running down, right? So there you have it. A nice little story there. One more, and that's Hippolyta. We'll go a little over, not too much. Hippolyta, a daughter of Ares, and again, and Otrera, the queen of the Amazons, and sister of Antiope, and sometimes her. She wore as an emblem of her dignity a girdle given to her by her father. And when Heracles, by the command of Eurystheus, came to fetch this girdle, Hippolytus was slain by Hercules. There's another tradition where Hippolytus, with an army of Amazons, as we talked about, marched into Attica to take vengeance on Theseus for having carried off Antiope. We talked about that a little bit. So she is very well known. She is, of course, the golden girdled queen. And early vases show Hercules and the Amazons oftentimes together, going back to the 8th to the 6th century BCE. And so basically, we see even early on, the basic plot goes as follows. Heracles or Hercules arrived at Themyscira. We talked about that earlier. About to go to battle for her girdle, in search of which he had been sent. He does succeed in getting it from her without the force of arms, because that's what he's supposed to do. But whereupon Hera arouses the other Amazons against him. In the fight that ensues, Heracles or Hercules is victorious, but he does slay Hippolyta. So there you have it. So that's basically the story. But we want to keep on going. So Hippolytus is very interesting, but I want to make sure I want to highlight the other two because you never hear those stories. You always hear about Hippolytus. So I gave you the overview. Now let's move on here. Strabo, here we go, gives credit to Metrodorus Scesis and as well as Hesperus, that at the time the Amazons were believed to live way out, in the areas of the north of the Black Sea. They were the border of those known as the Gargarians. The Gargarians. Now, and it mentions that there are 2 special months in spring in which the Gargarians, who were mostly all men, would get together with the Amazons, who are all women, and they would have a celebration together. So it goes as follows. The Gargarians, in accordance with an ancient custom, would go to this meeting place in the springtime in the mountains to offer sacrifice with the Amazons and also to have intercourse with them for the sake of begetting children. Now, they did this accordingly to trouble in secrecy and in darkness. And so after making them pregnant, they would then send them away. Now, any females that were born are retained by the Amazons themselves, but the males will be taken to the Gargarians to be brought up. And each Gargarian to whom a child is brought would adopt the child as his own, regarding the child as his son because of his uncertainty. So you have this interesting idea where you have this all male tribe, all female tribe, being the Amazons. They meet for a couple of months. They they have this great festival, making sure they got pregnant. And then, of course, after 9 months, then they would drive over and they'd they have the men, sorry, the male babies, they were brought over to the Targaryens. And that's how it happened, right? And so supposedly that's how they maintained just being all women, right? He also stated that the Gargarians went up from Themyscira into the region with the Amazons, then in company with them. So the Gargarians originated from the same area of northern Anatolia along the Black Sea. He also states that the right breasts of all the Amazons are seared when they are infants. And once again, talking about this legend, we talked about this earlier, right? Herodotus mentions also that when the Greeks defeated the Amazons during the war, that they sailed away in 3 ships, and what happened is that they disembarked on the land of the Scythians. Here they met with the Scythians. This again, the Scythians are now north of the Black Sea region. This is according to Herodotus. And the Scythian, so what happens is this story now is believed to be history according to Herodotus. And so the Amazons try to communicate to the Scythians, who are understood as very real people. We have lots of artifacts from them. And the Scythians do not understand their language. The Scythians also do not realize that they're women. And so according to the story, they go to battle. And what happens is the Scythians, when they got possession of the bodies of the dead, they discovered that, wait, we have been fighting women all this time. And so what happened then is when the Amazons, according to this story, went to fight against the Scythians, the Scythians would retire because they didn't want to fight them. And so what happened is the Scythians desired to have children by them. So when the Amazons perceived that they had not come to do them any harm, they let them alone. And eventually, the Amazons, according to Herodotus and the Scythians, interacted with one another and produced children. In fact, it says later the young Scythians and the Amazons joined their camps and lived together, each man having for his wife her with whom he had dealings at first. The men were not able to learn the language of the Amazons, but the women were able to learn Scythian. So you have this other interesting little story, again, of the exchanges of how in the world do you have all female warriors and no men? These are some of the explanations that we have found through our sources. Once again, Apollonius, Herodias mentioned that the Amazons were the daughters of Ares and Harmonia, as we talked about. But focus on the idea that because of the Ares aspect, they were brutal and aggressive, and their main concern was the life of war. So they're constantly battling, and that they're known to have built a marble temple dedicated to Ares. So we have this, in one of the islands. So there you have it. And then, of course, you have the Amazons also attacking various islands, but we won't go through all this. Now, a little bit more here. Okay, there we go. We're going to look still a little bit of religion here. Now, we realize that according to the sources, now, the earliest earliest forms of worship of various gods and goddesses is oftentimes not anthropomorphic, but it is deities that are worshipped in a Baalic or a aniconic shape. In other words, non-anthropomorphic. These are just basic images like a black stone, right? And the black stone represents, the deity. You're going to see this, for example, even throughout the ancient Middle East, the Mezabah stones, right, which oftentimes connect to worship of the all-high sky god El, and in some cases, the 2 standing stones connected to Yahweh and his Ashereth, right, his wife. Well, you have this idea of stones representing various deities at the earliest levels of ancient religion, and it's interesting because um, the Amazons are depicted as worshiping at these very kind of stones, a black stone, which is fascinating because a black stone was worshipped at the city of Pessinus in Phrygia, and it was dedicated to the great mother goddess Kybele. So you have reference to this by Apollonius. He mentions the fact that they engage in a similar kind of ritual that was recorded at Pessinus as actually happening, where the Amazons, venerated a black stone that was placed on the altar in an open temple situated on an island off the coast of Colchis, which of course is in the northern part of the Black Sea in the Crimea region. So, so many scholars very quickly make the connection that this is mother goddess worship, that the Amazons worship the goddess Kybele. In fact, you take a look here, and Diodorus said that the Amazons paid honor to, quote, the mother of gods, and that they also consecrated to her on the island of Samothrace, and they set up altars there to the mother of gods, and they perform what is called magnificent sacrifices there. So it looks from this evidence that the Amazons were votaries of the Great Mother, who is known as Rhea and also known as Kybele. So so in fact, in many ways, this worship was understood as an ecstatic form of worship, which we see, of course, around Kybele worship, which is also ecstatic. So that is important, right? It's interesting because, well, we'll keep going. So, of course, Kybele seems to have been that of an earth goddess of fertility, connected to humanity and beasts and the field. Her worship was accompanied by the sound of drums and cymbals, the music of the pipe, and the voices of those who are the frenzied votaries, right? So there you have it. You have, of course, the mystical Gali that are connected with them as well. And of course, the mother goddess worship of Kybele is connected with the Corbantes, which of course is an whole other story, as well as others. So I find it fascinating going through this. Now, taking a look here, it looks like, and I think this is interesting. We're right out of time, but I want to bring up a few things, and that is the fact that we're looking at the evidence here, and the Amazons are connected with the pre-Greek civilization. In some cases, they are also pre-Indo-European at times. So it gets a little interesting because there seems to be some correlation with the Minoans, or at least Minoan culture in many ways. So we see that as well. We see evidence that where some of the Amazons occupied, so were the Minoan civilization in general. Okay. Also, one thing I want to bring up is that this is a big one here. Okay, is that there seem to also worship the Cretan mother goddess as well, these Amazons, and that they use the Amazons are depicted as using a battle axe, which is oftentimes a double axe, which is a religious symbol for the pre-Hellenic and the Minoan civilization. So even going back to the double axe, there seems to be earlier connections of them within this context. Now, Uh, the Amazons are known in their rituals to go around and do this warlike dance, this mystical dance. And as it turns out, this is where they connect with the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians. The most ancient sources agree that the image of Artemis Ephesia was originally fashioned out of wood and was established by the Amazons. Callimachus declares in his hymn to Diana, "For thee too, the Amazons, whose mind is set on war, in Ephesus besides the sea, establish an image beneath an oak trunk, and Hippo or Hippolytus, right, performed a holy rite for thee, and they themselves, O Upas queen, around the image danced a war dance, first in shields and armor, and again in a circle, arrayed a spacious choir, and the loud pipes thereto piped shrill accompaniment, that they might foot the dance together, for not yet did they pierce the bones of the fawn. And the echo reached unto Sardis and to the Pecarian range, and they with their feet beat loudly, and therewith their quivers rattled. And afterwards around that image was raised a shrine of broad foundations. And it shall dawn, behold, nothing more divine, not richer, easily would it outdo Pitho. And so you have a description of the founding of the site that will become the temple of Artemis, one of the seven wonders of the ancient worlds. And the Amazon story was at its core. It was the foundation story. The Amazons, of course, Ephesus is located where? Yes, in Western Anatolia, Western Turkey. And so, these stories go deep here, as evident in the passage of Callimachus, as well as many other sources, right? The Amazons are behind many of the foundation legends related to the Temple of Artemis, a fact which manifests itself in popular culture and artwork about Ephesus well into Roman times. The circular ecstatic dance performed by this chorus of Amazons around the statue of Artemis, especially the shrilling syrinx and the aggressive stomping of the feet, resembles the manner in which the Curetes on Crete performed the flute as they protected the young Zeus. And so we have this early connection with Crete, not just the Mycenaeans, but going back to the Minoans in this ecstatic form of religion. This ritual dance from Crete appears to have continued being performed even into the time of Callimachus, 2040 BCE. Of course, Hippolytus is mentioned there. I want to mention that that the Amazons are so important. They're so important that according to Cornelius Tacitus, there's a question of whether the Emperor Tiberius should withdraw sanctuary rights, asylum rights from many of the temples and famous sites throughout Asia Minor, because there's a problem where criminals would go ask for asylum and the Romans couldn't take them from the temple because they had to, observe the respect to the temple precinct and their religious laws. And so he wanted to withdraw, Tiberius wanted to withdraw, even considered Ephesus. But then what happened is an embassy came from Ephesus, and they argued that they're the ones that had the sacred Ortygia Grove, which is a place where Leto gave birth to Artemis and Apollo. And they also mentioned that the grove, they said, had been consecrated by divine order. There, Apollo himself, after killing the Cyclops, had taken refuge from Jupiter's anger. Later, Bacchus, after defeating the Amazons, had pardoned those begging for mercy at the altar. So you have this part of the story that they share is a connection with the Amazons. Well, it goes further. As Pausanias, we talked about him, in the 2nd century, says as follows. He says, here it is, all cities worship Artemis of Ephesus. All cities worship Artemis of Ephesus, and individuals hold her in honor above all the gods. The reason, he says, in my view, is the first one he says, is the renown of the Amazons, who traditionally dedicated the image, also the extreme antiquity of sanctuary. And he mentions three other points as well have been contributed to her renown: the size of her temple, surpassing all buildings around men, the eminence of the city of the Ephesians, and the renown of the goddess who dwells there. But notice they mention Amazons first. So this Amazon story, a foundation story, is very important in many different ways. Okay, and of course, Ortega herself was sometimes viewed as the nurse, um, sometimes for the twins, Artemis and Apollo, usually connected to the goddess Asteria, who is the sister of Leto. In some cases, Asteria is not a goddess who watches after little Artemis and Apollo, but one of the 9 Amazons that were later killed by Hercules as he was stealing the girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolytus. And so you have, again, more stories and more legends. So where do we go from here? Is there any kind of reality for this, right? Well, of course, we take a look and we realize that, are we looking at sources here? I'm going through all my artwork. Yes, that first of all, that wherever the Amazons are located by the Greeks, they seem to be always being pushed along the edge of the civilized world. They're just on the very edge. And as the world becomes more understood, the Greeks know more about the world. The Amazons just seem to be pushed further out, right? But scholars have been finding some interesting discoveries that maybe the Amazonian legend in Greek mythology may have been inspired by real warrior women. There's evidence of high-ranking warrior women that come from the very area mentioned where the Amazons were said to be located in the southern Ukraine and Russia in the Crimea region. Did I mention as one of the sites? I did. In fact, this is the realm where I mentioned that the Scythians are from. Well, it turns out that about 25% of Scythian or Sarmatian warrior graves on the lower Don and Volga contain women dressed for battle, exactly similar to what the men are wearing. So 25% of the military burials of the armed Sarmatian women, they were fighters, and they also were holding bows. So wait a second. So women were able to defend themselves, maybe their animals and pasture lands competently. There's a period of time where the Scythians were the men were gone for 28 years. They would come back every now and then, and the women really had to take care of themselves. So maybe this is a source, but there are other sources all throughout this region of the Caucasus and going into the area of Ukraine and even going to Slavic realms, where we're finding evidence that there were indeed women who were warriors that were fighting just like everybody else. So, and let's go, drum roll, please. Let's go one step further. They're contemporaneous to the Amazon stories that are told by the Greeks and the Romans. So, what am I saying here? Oh, no. There is an absolute kernel of truth that there was something there enough to create the Amazon story. There is. Archaeology doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have, it doesn't have a point to prove. Although you do have interpretive methods that have to be considered, still looking at it, you do have female warriors in the very area where the Greeks and Romans said there were female warriors. But what amazes me is how powerful they are. Also, if you hadn't noticed, I'm making sure you're paying attention. Did you notice that they go from extremely powerful to gradually less and less powerful as the sources become later on? I mean, at first you have the Amazons, and they're beating up those of Atlantis, and they're beating up the Gorgons, and then as time goes on, we get to the Trojan period, and they're still formidable, and they're hard to beat, right? Scary. But as we move further in later on, they become, of course, you have this invasion. It starts with the invasion of Attica. Always, they're defeated. But all of a sudden, you start having these stories where they start to settle, where they start to interact. And so you have the legends where they are able to be defeated and they are able to be conquered. And I don't know, how this works. This is patriarchy, justifying themselves, just saying, okay, or that the memory of many of these female warriors are becoming less and less, even though you still have them in outlying areas. And so more of the so-called civilized agenda makings taking place. I don't know. But I do want to say one last thing, and that is still the earlier sources do not always have them as roving barbarian hordes. In many cases, they are described as being civilized and establishing cities. Establishing cities that were there for quite a while. And of course, we go back to where we started, and that's Themyscira, right? Themyscira, last I checked, that's a city. And so you have this idea where they're moving, they were civilized or believed as civilized at times, and other times they're viewed as barbarous. It just all depends on your perspective. And I think it's always convenient when it comes to whoever's agenda, whoever wants to write about it, they kind of decide for themselves what they want to do in this case. But I want to wrap this up. I just want to say that I had a lot of fun talking about Amazon stories that you don't ordinarily hear. And I want to also mention that do I believe that there was such thing as Amazons? Why not just answer this question? And the answer is, I believe that there was a very strong, credible source, that there were those who were like the Amazons. In fact, maybe many different groups that fell under the branch of being understood as Amazons. So in other words, there were many female warriors during this period of time, going back to during the third and second millennia. And as we get to the first millennia, those memories start to fade, and that they did migrate about, and that the ancients decided to slap on them, these diverse group, the word Amazon as a way to kind of almost reductionist in many ways of just making them all the same. But I do believe that there is substance to the stories, but as far as the details, that's where it moves into a haze that is history, which falls into legend. Thank you so much. And that is all for now. There we go. So any questions?
I wondered if you could recommend a translation of Pausanias.
Well, okay. So Pausanias. Okay, so you have the Loeb Library edition of Pausanias, which is good. Yeah, it's good. But I would recommend the Pelican or Penguin Classics version and get it annotated. And you don't have to have the Greek there, and it's fun to read. I highly recommend it. So just order it, and I have it here. And it's the Penguin, Pelican, either one starts with P's. Pausanias all starts with P's. But yeah, I recommend that. And also, again, I recommend if you ever go to Greece, please take Pausanias with you. And you can, and of course, the newer version, newer translations, it mentions, in the footnotes, it mentions the names of the modern day city, so you can kind of keep track of where you are. Sometimes the names don't change at all, but in some cases they do, and that way, if you arrive at a city, you can go, oh, all this happened there, And Pausanias is very detailed, so he goes into everything.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Another question. Yeah. All right. Looks like I answered all the questions. I pushed you guys all the way to the periphery of the edge of the civilized world, right? So you're there. So, but it's a lot of fun. I love tracing how they're being pushed slowly to the edge of civilization. And it does show the march of patriarchy. It does show the advancement of those ideas in a very tangible way. So, all right. Well,
actually, I do have a quick question.
Yeah, Sarah.
So, a lot of the modern retellings, a lot of the Amazon stories have the Amazons as within sort of the male size spectrum, as in much bigger women. Is there any truth to that, or where do the modern stories get that from?
And the answer is yes. And the answer is actually, in fact, I read one of the stories just now. It mentioned them as being very tall.
Okay.
So it's tall, not necessarily big, but tall. So they are known to be very tall as stature. I'm sure they're very strong, right? So yeah, there is something to it. So the Penthesilea, when she was slain, they were, wow, she's tall, all these little Greeks who were so short in those days, right? They're excited to be up to like 4'10" and 11. It's like, woo-hoo. We know this because we have their graves, So, sometimes they're like 5'2" or 5'3". But, so you picture these little Greeks and this huge Amazon. I look around. She's probably like, 5'11", but hey, the giant in those days. But yes, there is something to it where they're powerful of physique, but they're also considered immensely beautiful and divine or godlike in their ways. Hello. I took the time to tell you the whole Achilles story because Achilles falls in love with a dead Amazon because she's pretty.
That's a little kinky.
That's a little strange, a little beguiled. But there it is, Like, wow,
I wouldn't call that kinky.
Huh?
I said I wouldn't call that kinky. It's more necrophilia.
Necrophilia.
Necrophilia doesn't come under the kinky?
I guess, but it's one of those
well, like I said,
Okay.
but apparently, these are prudish Greeks, so they're probably thinking he's just looking at her and going, "Oh, she's so beautiful. I'm in love." It's a little late, buddy, especially since I skipped this big long speech against her before he killed her. He's big old, and then he killed her. He's, "Oh, why did I do that? She's so sweet, sweet. She was killed you." What's sweet about that? She was beat you up. So, but one lesson is learned, and that is never boast if Athena's listening. Never say, "Hey, you know what? I can do this better. I can sew this better. I can weave this better. I can sing better." I can never do that. You know, and the sad thing is that speech is so long. You see her and she just keeps going on and going, and you know the people listening to this are going, please stop posting. No, 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 hubris. Yeah. So she really gets it. I didn't get the full description. It's a long, bloody description of how she died, but you get the idea where she falls face first in the earth. I mean, it's Athena made sure that she paid for her hubris, you know, and still she looked good. I'm just trying to figure out how her eyebrows, painted on eyebrows, stayed on. If your face is faced on the ground, that must be pretty enduring makeup. You know, turn around, it's like, wow, it's still there.
Only in the movies.
Huh?
Only in the movies,
Only in the epics, right?
right?
You know, I tell you, people don't change from epics to movies. I think we're just terribly unrealistic. But yeah. Any other great question, Sarah? Any other thoughts? What I talked about, does this change your view of the Amazons at all? Any changes or perspectives, or you still kind of feel the same way, or did you learn something you didn't know about the Amazons?
I absolutely learned things I did not know about the Amazons. I went much deeper into the history and the stories about. I knew that they had been at the edges of most civilizations, but like you went way deeper than that.
Yeah, I decided to
Very
go
much.
like to the Libya stratum,
Right? Yeah.
and then of course the story of Atlantis. Have you guys ever heard that story before?
Never.
I know, and you
Right.
know you have all these people are all into Atlantis. I mean,
That was
seriously,
a surprise for me. I didn't know that they had such a strong tie to Atlantis.
yeah.
That was new information for me too.
Yeah, and it's like everybody's all to have all these books and things published on the Atlantis, and I never read the story. I'm thinking, how can they skip this story? This is, this is too good. It's too rich. They beat the Atlanteans. They defeated them, and then they're all okay. And then they became friends, and then they defend as if Atlantis. I guess they need defending. Amazons are so strong. Those Atlantis are going, can you please help us? Against the Gorgons, and then the Gorgons.
Well,
And
yeah,
everybody's and
was
everybody's
new
connected
too.
with snakes, huh?
that was new information too.
And and of course the Amazons are wearing snake skin. What do you think about that?
Sounds like they worship the Gorgons.
Right. You see the Gorgon connection, right? Gorgons. So we're going into an earlier stratum where we have to rethink the Medusa story too, because after the Medusa, you have her suddenly her hair turns into snakes, right? And she's able to turn things to stone. But now we have a problem because now earlier on you have these Gorgons that have this kind of a magical ability earlier. Does that make sense? It's like, wait, that throws everything off. So maybe the curse is that she continues to have that all the time. It's kind of like the story of, if you make a face like this, it's going to stay like that. It's kind of like that. It's like, you're stuck now as a Gorgon forever. You don't have that temporary moment. Maybe that's what it is, right? I don't know. Who knows? But that's my thought. All right. Well, this was a fun talk, right? You guys, yeah.